What is this commemoration day that's been established?
Israel in 2014, the Knesset, Israel's parliament, passed a very important law that marks November 30th every year as the year to commemorate November 30th every year to commemorate the date of the expulsion and the departure of Jews from Arab countries and Iran. It's part of the Jewish memory and the Jewish history that is a story that's untold. People talk about the refugee population that resulted from the wars that took place after the establishment of the State of Israel, the modern State of Israel in 1948. And they only talk about the Palestinian refugees without realizing that there was a second population of refugees, and that is the Jewish refugees from Arab countries and Iran, which numbered some 850,000.
The injustice of Middle Eastern and Sephardic Judaism. And therefore, the day of commemoration instituted by the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, a couple of years ago, according to which every year on November 30th, one day after the day in which we celebrate the UN partition plan that gave international legitimacy to the State of Israel on November 29th, 1947, is a day in which we take a breath and remember the plight of most of us sitting in this room. In Hebrew, there's a term called tikkun avla, which means rectifying, alleviating a wrong. So that wrong, first and foremost, is domestic, within Israel and world Jewry. The plight and suffering and displacement and disposition of Middle Eastern Jewry can no longer and will no longer become marginalized and peripheralized. And that's very important. And on the universal, international level, we are a proactive people. We are masters of our own destiny. So we build forward. 850,000 Jews who originate from Arab lands. Add to that, in the aftermath of the Islamic Revolution in '79, those are brothers and sisters from the Persian community who gave the LA Jewish community such an injection of love and traditionalism and presence. Altogether, the number of Jewish refugees from the Middle East exceeds by far the number of Palestinian refugees. And the assets confiscated by the Arab leaders and the leaders of Iran, do I have to tell you, my beloved friends, brothers and sisters, that they are in the billions? Homes, businesses, exceed by far the monetary and material worth of the homes and businesses and possessions of the Palestinians, many of whom were called upon by their own leaders to leave and come back once the Jewish state is destroyed and the Jews are slaughtered. This is just a fact. The world needs to know this fact. We need to be more vocal. Respectfully, I say to the distinguished Consul General, all of Israeli diplomacy and political elite must be vocal. There cannot be a monetary compensation to the Palestinian refugees without symmetry. It should be taken care of. But beyond the dramatic intensity and pain and even tragedy that we commemorate and remember tonight, I will end. Because, when you give a rabbi 5 minutes, he speaks for 15. By saying the following, that today is also, I dare say, a chag. Today is a day of rejoicing, of celebrating. Because I ask all of you with love to look at where you are today and where your descendants are. And to think about that day you left. And how you felt. And how you were treated. And how little you had. And I want you to embrace all your loved ones and think about the empire that you built. Not only successful businesses, but beautiful families and beautiful communities. And that's the difference between us and, sadly, our Middle Eastern neighbors and the Palestinians. We became masters of our own destiny. They choose to live in victimhood and despair. And we long for that day in which things will change, and our neighbors will also become proactive. I want to conclude by saying that we're reading now in the Torah. We read very recently about the first refugee that's mentioned in the Torah. He comes to Abraham and he says that there's a war going on. And it says, "Vayavo hapalit vayaked." The refugee came and he said what happened. And that's the responsibility of everyone in this room. Starting first and foremost, those of you who actually left your respective places of birth. Veshinantam levanecha, you should convey these to your children. This is an honorable legacy, what our community has built. And therefore, this is also a day of celebration and festivity. Hashem should bless all of us with long health and life, and God forbid that we know and we pray that our descendants will not have to go through that journey. Let them cherish and honor our journey and move forward as one community and as one people. Welcome.
Sephardic songs. How is it possible that I could be so in love with Arab music? You know, Caroline from the Consul General was just telling me now, this music transports you. My mother speaks Arabic. If you come to our bar mitzvahs and our weddings and our simchas, it's Arab music. How is it possible that I'd be so in love with Arab culture? I'm the proudest Jew I know. And there's something about when I hear Arab music that just transports me. Even when my mother speaks Arabic, there's a professor in UCLA who's Muslim, he's from Morocco. And he's one of the world experts on Moroccan Jews. So he comes to my house for Shabbat, he's been there many times. His name is Al Mahmoud, amazing guy, call him my brother. So my mother was in town from Montreal, she was cooking, and they were speaking in Arabic. Same family. She's cooking food, Sephardic food, and he's telling her this is the same food that I ate growing up in Morocco as a Muslim Arab, right? It's unbelievable. How do you deal with this stuff, right? Because it's a day of commemoration, and they're so complicated because I can't tell you how happy I am that we left. You know? But then I go back and it pulls me, and I have memories of Mimuna and the Jewish ghettos of Casablanca, right? And they're like amazing memories. And all the doors were open in the neighborhood of all the Jewish homes. And I was a little kid, 6 years old, 7 years old, and it's all this craziness after Pesach, because you're transitioning from, matzah to bread, and the Arabs are bringing us all the stuff that we need, and the flour, and there's all this, madness that, everyone's got to prepare all these amazing sweet tables. And for hours and hours, we just run around from one house to another, because it was Mimuna, it was the magical night, right? And I had these memories from Morocco. And then, a few years later, it's -20 in Montreal, and it's miserable. Because we moved. We moved. It was 1964. And I remember, because this is a night of remembering, so let's remember. So I remember, in Montreal, things would come into the apartment, and it was free. And I would always ask my mother, furniture would come, and then dishes and covers, and we had jackets. And we had red jacket, we had red hats, right? So I would always ask my mother, where does all this stuff come from? And she would always say, la chayas, la chayas, la chayas. In French, you don't say hayas, you say chayas. You spell the J, right? So I was a little kid, 9 years old, and I'm hearing that this thing called the JIS keeps giving us free stuff. Little did I know that 40 years later, I would be at a fundraiser in Beverly Hills for HIAS, right? And it all came back retroactively. This was my introduction to Jewish solidarity. And it was retroactive. It's like, oh my God. So there was probably a fundraiser in Beverly Hills in 1964. And somebody was saying, you know, we have our Jewish brothers and sisters in Morocco who need our help. And they couldn't take any of their money with them. And we need to take them to wherever they need to go, whether it's Canada, France, or Israel, and step up. And Ashkenazi Jews stepped up. They had no idea I had one eyebrow and I looked like an Arab. They didn't know who I was, they didn't know my face. But they knew Suissa was a Jew, and there were lots of us, and I stepped up. This was my introduction to Jewish solidarity. Ashkenazi Jews stepping up for Sephardic Jews just because I was Jewish. And I remember in the schools we went to in Montreal, if ever I would see a red hat, I knew it was a Sephardic guy because they would get quantity discounts with the jackets. So they had a lot of red hats. So that was a little sign. So it's really a complicated story. My grandfather, God bless him, 11 children. He had this great business in Casablanca selling spices and cheese. He was doing really well. But two of his boys, when they heard 1947, the news is out, they went to fight in the War of Independence. And then he takes 6 more children in 1952, and yeah, they suffered. They had to leave, and they left. He left everything behind. And they go into a little developmental town in Ashkelon called Shikun Drumi. They give him a little shack. Yes, somebody from Shikun Drumi, beautiful, unbelievable. It's funny, when I went to visit him years later when I was a hippie hitchhiking with no money and a bus lands me at night in Shikun Drumi, all I had to do was ask for Yamin Biton. I asked this guy smoking Thai cigarettes, and he took me right to my grandfather's house. So it was a little shack, right? Little house, and 7 kids in 1 bedroom, and him and my grandmother in the other. And he went from being a great businessman in Casablanca to a little kiosk in Ashkelon. Little kiosks selling candy and stuff, right? But here's the catch. When he landed in Israel, he kissed the ground and said, I'm never leaving, because I'm coming home, right? So it's a complicated story. It's a complicated story. He leaves a really comfortable life in Casablanca, but he's a religious man. So if you're a religious man, you're praying 3 times a day to return home to Zion. It's in our blood. Do you know that of all the things I tell my children to instill in them a Jewish pride? And God knows I got a big mouth, I talk a lot. God knows I've told them a lot of things. So I'm trying to put the odds on my side. I think the most powerful one I've ever said to them, so when we sit down with the Kiddush on Friday night, I said to them, you know, just think, 1,000 years ago, a little village somewhere in Morocco, your grandparents, your bubbies and sadies, were sitting at some little table, and they were lighting the Shabbat candles like we did, making the exact same Kiddush we're making now. It's impossible. How could that be, right? For me, that's a bigger miracle than the splitting of the Red Sea. So this idea of continuity that we have kept on is for me the most powerful story. So when we're asked to remember today, on this day of commemoration, I don't just remember that we were victims when we left. We were victims. My grandfather did suffer. I have to say that Morocco was not exactly the same experience. As we saw in the film, if many of you probably know that the #1 advisor to the king, his name is André Azoulay, and he's a Jew. And the king's father was known. Take care of the Jews. When I went back to Morocco 12 years ago, there's a Jew that got killed that day. His name was Amram. He was a guy who worked in wood. The next day there was a full-page ad from the king apologizing to the Jewish community. They're all torn up that we left. There were 300,000 Jews in Morocco, and now there's less than 3,000. My friends, my Arab friends, are torn up that we left because we contributed so much. So that's also another thing to remember, is how much they lost, how much the Arab countries lost. But I can't help thinking how much we've gained. Because when I hear about our rights, and we remember our rights, I also remember our obligations. So for me, I also remember that today is a day of solidarity. It's a day that reminds me how good Jews are at taking care of each other. And like the Rabbi Sessler was saying, I long for the day when our Arab neighbors could do as well as we do when it comes to taking care of each other. I want to tell them, look at our story of refugees and take care of your own the way we did. Take care of your own the way we did. Why won't you take care of your own? Why won't you take care of your own? Millions and millions of refugees leaving Syria. Meanwhile, there are hundreds and thousands of these amazing booths in Saudi Arabia, completely empty. Why won't they take care of their own? Why won't all those Arab countries help take care of their Palestinian brothers and sisters? So this story, as much as it hurts me to think of how we suffered, as much as it hurts me to hear the stories of persecution, whether it was in Iraq or Lebanon or Egypt or Syria, as much as it hurts me, I'm still reminded of how great it is to be Jewish. Because for me, the story of commemoration of the Jews for Arab countries is a victory in a way. It's a story of our incredible ability to survive no matter what. And it's that thing that we've got, that ability to recite the same Kiddush century after century after century. You know, it's very, very popular to say Jews are so different. We have so many differences, especially in Los Angeles, one of the most diverse communities on the planet when it comes to Judaism. And it's common. You hear it all the time. We're so different. And it's true. You know, I go to a Sephardic minyan. It's a lot closer to a mosque minyan than it is to an Ashkenazi minyan. On Yom Kippur and the high holidays, in the morning, I go to a Sephardic minyan on Magen David. In the afternoon, I take my boy, we walk to Yaki, then Ashkenazi, because I want my boy to see both, right? Completely different. You would think we would be in a completely different galaxy. It's so different you can't imagine. The foods are different, we look different, the singing is different, the melodies are different. Our differences go on forever. When we had Young Israel Century City, they have great acoustics, so I wanted the bar mitzvah to be there. I went to the rabbi, I said, Rabbi, I'm Sephardic, you're Ashkenazi, I'm a member of your shul. I feel I should do the bar mitzvah in your shul. He said, David, you know, and I said, you know, I have all my family is Sephardic, they're coming from Montreal, you know, we're Sephardic. David, we've never done Sephardic in this synagogue, we're very Ashkenazi, blah, blah, blah. I said, but for you, we might make it an exception, right? Thank you. So, we did a Sephardic service at Young Israel. Amazing. Mashiach was right around the corner. Unbelievable. A Sephardic, the most Ashkenazi shul in LA. And then what was the reaction? It was unbelievable. All my Ashkenazi friends, oh my God, I thought we were a great shul. Little did I know how great we could even be greater. There was this unbelievable amount of embracing and love and so forth. But what was the point? That all the melodies were so different, but the words were the same. So when you think that the temple gets destroyed in the year 70, and for 19 centuries we wander around the globe, just imagine my ancestor in the year 70 saying he was maybe buddies with Rabbi Sessler's ancestor, and they say, oh, see you in 1900 years. And they meet 1900 years later on Fairfax. And guess what? They go to shul, and nothing has changed. They're reading the same Torah. Unbelievable. And he invites them to his house for Shabbat. And guess what? They're reciting the same Kiddush and the same blessings. That for me is a miracle. So when I hear that Jews are different, I said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So this thing that binds us, but it's because we look different, because our melodies are different and our foods are different, that we're able to see how much we have in common. So that's another thing I remember today on this day of commemoration. I remember that leaving Morocco, being one of the 850,000, has enabled me to live out what I call the grand family reunion of the Jewish people. My great-grandfather in Morocco never met an Ashkenazi Jew. Neither did his father or his father. And I'm here, and especially at the Jewish Journal, I hear it from all the Jews. You know, to think there's got to be 100 nationalities of Jews here. That's a blessing. So that's also something else I remember on this day of commemoration. I remember that I've been able to live out this grand family reunion that we're blessed to be part of. So at the end, as we go forward in the future years of commemorating this day, which I think it's a fantastic idea that the Israeli government has initiated this, and I hope it becomes one of those days that just grows every year, and that we just add on, just it gets better and better and better. And I hope it becomes a global idea. And that part of this global idea, I hope the idea of solidarity makes its way into this narrative. Because it's one of the things that I'm most proud of being a Jew, this ability that I can ask any of you tonight. If there's a Jew suffering in Argentina, you'll stand up and this idea of solidarity, I think, is one of the greatest gifts we can show the world, to take care of our own and to remember each other and to have this sense of solidarity at a time when it might be politically incorrect or even say it. But I'm never afraid to say it, because I think it's an example we can give to the world, this idea of being able to take care of our own. So that's something that I remember on this day of commemoration. And then the last thing, it's just a little story about holding the hand of my father on the night of Yom Kippur at Neila. We all have, memories. It's the night of memories. And it was the one day, I had an interesting journey because, when I came to California, I started experimenting, with two different things. I was a hippie and stuff, and somehow there was something that always kept me connected to Judaism. It was this one melody of Neila. I would hold my father's hand, and we were very hungry, and you could feel everybody was hungry. It was the end, 24 hours. We were trying to open the gates of heaven. And the Sephardic tradition is everybody comes in front, and you see they open up the ark, and then you cover yourself with your talis, and then you start singing, El Nora Lila, El Nora Lila, Amsila Nomechila, Anela, and it's like goosebumps, And I remember being a kid, I would hold my father's hand, and there's like a whole bunch of us, and it's like you're singing to open the gates of heaven. And it struck me that there's something going on here. And it never hit me until I held my boy's hand. In LA, I held my boy's hand. And we were singing it again. And I remember that when I held my father's hand, I was holding the hands of his ancestors, going way back to the temple. And I was holding my boy's hand. I was also holding my descendants, And it struck me that no matter where we were, whether we were refugees, whether we were happy, whether we were persecuted, no matter what, we held our hands and we sang Ne'ilah. And that's what I want to leave you with that one thought of solidarity and continuity. Thank you.
Okay, you are Sephardic. People because you're so fair-skinned, people don't think of you as Sephardic.
I'm Sephardic on both sides. My mother was Sephardic and my father was Sephardic. And they were both from Turkey. My mother and father came to the United States when they were 14 years old, and they kissed the ground of the United States. They love this country, and people don't really realize what a wonderful country we have here. And I served in World War II and Korea. In World War II, I served in New Guinea, the Philippines, and Japan, and then I got called back in the Korean War in 1949. We couldn't have a war without any soldiers, so they formed a reception center at Fort Ord, and I was training soldiers so they were shipped out to Korea. I was discharged in 1952 at the end of the war. It certainly is a pleasure to be an American citizen and to serve this country of the United States. God bless America. This is the most wonderful country in the world. Thank you very much for having me say a few words. I really appreciate it. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Zeigensnit. What's your name, please?
Yaki Lopez,
How do you spell Yaki?
Yaki.
Title.
Consul for Political Affairs at the Israeli Consulate in Los Angeles.
What is the holiday and why was it established?
Well, the day of commemoration for the Jewish refugees from Arab lands and Iran was a law that was enacted in the Israeli Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, in recent years. And this day is now commemorated all over the world, especially in Israel, but in other communities around the world, on November 30th annually. And all of the Israeli missions abroad, consulates and embassies are mandated to commemorate this day so that we remember that there isn't another story to tell, a story of Jewish refugees that also suffered as a result of the war in 1948 and were expelled from their ancestral homelands in many Arab countries.
Is there a movement to seek retribution? And when I say, what do they call it? When they're looking for restitution?
Definitely. This is something that the Israeli government will insist on during all negotiations, something that we make it a point to demand that restitution be made to the Jewish refugees who were expelled, who were kicked out of their ancestral homelands where they lived and had thriving communities, thriving businesses.
Were their possessions confiscated?
In many countries, their possessions, of course, were confiscated. Synagogues were burned down. Homes were destroyed. People were persecuted. So it is incumbent upon us as the Israeli government, as a representative of the Jewish people, to demand that restitution be made to these people.
Is it a money event? Is it about money, this?
I think first and foremost it's an issue about justice, demanding justice for the Jewish refugees, but also it's an issue of demanding that these people that whose possessions were confiscated, that they are rightly given or returned back what's theirs, or to their families. Many of these people, of course, have passed on, but their families still live on, and they should be compensated for what was taken away from their families.
Does the Israeli government have a position on completing an exchange of populations? In other words, if 850,000 Jews were kicked out of Arab countries, and now that there are Palestinians who claim that they have almost that many refugees, do the Arab countries have a responsibility to absorb them?
Well, I think the Arab countries should have a responsibility to take care of the refugees, the Arab or the Palestinian refugees that were created as a result of the war in 1948. The fact that they that have not taken upon this responsibility and have kept them in refugee camps throughout the Middle East, I think is shameful, and it's something that they should take a good look at themselves and ask the question why they have not taken care of their Palestinian brethren.
Nathaniel, Malka.
And do you have a title?
I'm the Vice President of JIMENA, Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa, which is a nonprofit organization based here in California, which is one of the sponsoring organizations of tonight's event.
If I were to look at you, I'd say there's no way that this guy is Sephardic. Is that right?
That would be a mistake. My family is from Baghdad, and if you believe it, I have two uncles who are lighter than me and have blue eyes. I also have two uncles who look a bit more like Saddam Hussein. So there's a bit of variety, and the Iraqi diaspora is quite broad.
Would you describe a little what the organization's about?
Sure. What we do is we advocate for universal recognition of the history and heritage of the Jewish communities of the Middle East and North Africa. So we record and share the history. One of the programs that we have is an oral history program similar in many ways to what Spielberg has achieved with the Shoah Foundations. We archive oral history video testimonies of eyewitness survivors from everywhere from Casablanca to Cairo to Baghdad, and archive these with Ben-Gurion University and in the Israeli archives.
Were Jewish people kicked out of these countries quickly, and did they have their businesses and possessions confiscated?
Absolutely, yes. The statistic that you usually hear is that 90% of those who left all of the Jewish communities from the Middle East and North Africa did not have a choice.
90% did not have a choice?
Correct, 90%.
Did they have to leave their bank accounts?
In some cases, I would say the ones that did well were the ones that were able to roll, lift, and carry a rug with them on the way out as a store of wealth, but those were the lucky ones. And again, that's 90% out of about 850,000 from the Arab countries in the Middle East, and when you include Iran, the number goes up to about 1 million.
So how many Jews in total do you think were expelled from their Arab lands?
850,000.
And are you looking for a reciprocation from the Palestinians to exchange population so that they are no longer the problem for Israel? That Israel should have them in Judea, Samaria? Do you guys have a position on that?
So we are not a political organization. What we focus on is remembrance, and this is really very important for two different reasons. One is the emotional. We as Jews, we remember where we come from. We honor our ancestors. We honor our past. And then, of course, there is the more rational reason, which is intellectual honesty, very simply. How can you really even contemplate the history of a whole region while omitting such a large, important group of people that were part of the history of that region?
What was Rabbi Kahane's take on population exchange?
First of all, Rabbi Kahane pointed out during World War II, in the aftermath of World War II, 12 million ethnic Germans were thrown out of the Sudetenland between what happened with what they did to the Poles and what they did to the Czechs. They didn't want any part of the Germans. They threw them all out. The world didn't say anything. Between Greece and Turkey over the island of Cyprus, there was a population exchange. All over the world, there has been population exchanges that worked out quite nicely. Pakistan and India comes to mind. Over the history, millions more than we're talking about in Eretz Israel. And here we had 850,000 Jews from the Arab lands who were mostly thrown out with the shirt on their back with no compensation for their property. They came to Israel and were absorbed and taken in, or they went elsewhere in the world to France and to America and to Canada. But the bottom line is they were absorbed, and they had a place to go, and they had a way to make their lives take off and work out. And now we need, for the sake of fairness, we need to complete that population exchange. That's what will bring peace to the Middle East. We won't have to kill Arabs, and we won't allow Arabs to kill Jews anymore. It's not a matter of war, it's a matter of peace. If you really want peace, Rabbi Meir Kahane said, if you really want peace, then you'll do this. You'll separate the two peoples from each other so they can't kill each other morning, noon, and night.
Would a Palestinian state do that? A boundary set up between the Green Line, essentially, and Israel proper?
Absolutely not. It's too close, and even if it were allowed according to the Torah, we can't trust them. That all they want to do is destroy us. We gave them Gaza gratis. We gave them as a unilateral statement that we mean peace. Here's Gaza back, and they just made more missiles and more terrorism than we can solve. We had to build a wall on the southern flank to keep them out. So the population exchange, Rabbi Meir says, anybody who says that they're for a peace plan and coexistence, like they get along with each other, they slaughter each other all over the world, let alone them. We're supposed to get along with them because we have so much in common, right? They can't even get along with their own, he said. Hezbollah and Shiites and Sunnis, they slaughter one another. Each one slaughters the other Seder all the time. So to say any of that, he says that peace is possible of coexistence and a two-state solution is a demagogue, someone who's either lying or is it just delusional? And the only way for peace, to reduce the bloodshed, is to separate the two peoples completely. Now, Jordan is also part of Eretz Israel, and the world knew this when they gave the Palestinian mandate for the Jewish people to have a homeland, right?
The mandate for Palestine.
Mandate for Palestine was on both sides of the Jordan River. They knew exactly where biblical Eretz Israel was, that we were dragged out kicking and screaming by the Babylonians and later by the Romans. And we never gave up our right to our land. We never said we're not coming home. We always prayed 3 times a day to come home. But the basic point is that Jordan is ours, but we're not willing to make a war over it to take it back unless they start a war with us. Then we will take it back. But meanwhile, they can all go there. They can go to Jordan, they can go to Lebanon, they can go to Egypt, they can go if America is insane enough to take them in, they can come to America. All these 1 or 2 million Palestinian Arabs that live on the West Bank or inside Israel, they have to go. There is no peace. There's no living with them. They don't mean peace. They don't want peace. They could have had peace since 1947. They rejected it and went to war over it. And we're not talking about just wars like the Indians used to skirmish with each other, different tribes. We're talking about wars of extermination that they talked about. Well, they were like going to record the great Mongol invasion of Asia, from Asia into Eastern Europe, and they were going to completely show the world what warriors they are, and they're going to slaughter every Jew and every Jew into the sea, and the streets of Tel Aviv are going to flow with Jewish blood. Okay. So,
what do you suppose would happen if the modern Israeli government were to try a dictum to expel their Arab and Muslim? Are you asking for the Israeli Arabs or the Palestinian Arabs to be expelled?
All Arabs. All Arabs inside our land. They don't have any respect for our God. They hate us with a bloodlust and a blood hatred. And therefore there's no making peace with them. The Torah is very clear. You're not allowed to live in your land Gentiles who have this hatred for you and will not respect God's sovereignty over the land or the Jewish people's sovereignty over the land. They're not allowed to live there, and the Torah has told us over and over again what to do about such peoples that we encounter when we come there under Yoshua, or now when we came back under the UN partition plan. When we came back, the bottom line is that they don't mean peace, they don't want peace, they've never wanted peace, they want it all. They want a Palestinian state that they say we stole from them, and they'll never change their mind about it. No matter how much of the West Bank we give back. There was not peace in '66 before they went to get all of Israel from the West Bank, and there'll never be peace as long as there's a Israeli state the size of a postage stamp, Rabbi Meir said. And he also said that the Torah says that you're supposed to throw these people out, and if you won't do it, it's going to be bad for you, and they're going to be thorns in your side and harass you on the land and make life difficult for you, if not impossible for you, as we've seen thousands of the Jews just since Oslo in 93, maimed and killed thousands, 2, 3, 4,000 Jews. More than in all the years from 48 to 93, we've had more Jews killed in terrorism just between 93 and 2016 as we speak. And Rabbi Meir said as the following, and I want to reiterate this. He said in a video that I saw that I've told you, he says in the name of Hashem, I've told you what to do with such a people that hate you like this. If you're not going to listen, enjoy them. And to wit I add, enjoy them, because you're not listening. I add that don't come crying to me when they burn the country down. Practically 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago in Eretz Israel. Don't come praying to me and saying Tehillim. And I've already told you in the Torah what to do about them. If you won't listen, this is your lot, this is your fate. I've told you, if you leave peoples, the Canaanim back then, the Arabs, Zman Hazeh, right now in our time period, if you leave them in the land, they are going to be this disaster for you, and you're not going to be able to live there. The ground's going to shake underneath you. All the conquest, all the increasing of the land of Eretz Israel, the ancient, historical, biblical land of Israel is shaking under us, and we're starting to give it back piecemeal. We can't hold on to it. We can't inherit it down the generations to our children and grandchildren. We can't live in peace there. And exactly what Chazal said, our sages said on the commentary on these verses in the Torah, that if you're not going to throw them out, drive them out, then they're going to say, not just on the part that you're occupying of their land that they're sitting on, that you haven't conquered completely from them and gotten them out, on the part that you're already dwelling on, they're going to say, you're thieves, get out. And that's what we've seen happen. And this can't go on much longer without Israel collapsing completely, God forbid.